As Shahab said, I usually give tours. That's what I'm most used to doing in front of an audience. So the experience of speaking at length without anybody interrupting me is going to be a strange one. By the way, if you have seen anything here, or if you do see anything in here afterwards that you do want to talk about, I will still be in the space after I've finished yakking, so feel free to come up and ask or talk or converse or whatever. Okay. When I was first asked to do this talk and I was told that the subject was genius, I initially said I thought I would talk about the infrastructure of genius, the idea of an infrastructure around genius. And the reason that this idea occurred to me was that I'd been reading an author named Charlotte Dacre. It's actually her pseudonym, but she wrote a book called The Floyer or the Moor, which was published in 1806. It's a semi-Gothic novel. It follows fairly obviously on the heels of Anne Radcliffe's Mysteries of Udolpho. And if you know Gothic, or if you're fond of Gothic literature at all, then you've probably already read that. It was not the very first Gothic novel, but it was the first enormously popular Gothic novel. You know, it was an absolute bestseller, and it had an enormous influence on pulp that came after it. And you can see elements of Udolpho reappearing in The Floyer, in particular a troupe of Italian bandits, the banditti, that play a fairly large role in Udolpho, and behold, they pop up through several narrative convolutions and pieces of literally magic in The Floyer. Okay, the reason that Dacre seemed important was that she was one of the favourite authors of Lord Byron. And I'm guessing that you possibly haven't heard of Dacre, but you probably have heard of Byron. His name still endures. Now, I would not defend the idea of Byron as a genius at all, but I do think that he and the people that he was with, Shelley, and the actions that he took, the fame that he had, did have a kind of genius-like effect on the culture of his time. He was the foremost exponent of a certain way of acting towards the world, and thinking about the world and modeling yourself to the world. So while I'm not saying that he's a genius, I am saying, look, he was a celebrity, and you can say, I think, that celebrity is one kind of genius, that it's an aspect of genius, and that genius is also an aspect of celebrity. Dacre, even though most people have not heard of her, was part of the infrastructure of Byron's genius-like behaviour. She was there. She was part of the mulch that helped to create what he was. And I'd like to propose this kind of way of thinking about genius, not so much as here is a person with genius, here is a figure that we put the name genius on, the label, the category of genius, but genius as a group project, genius as a cultural movement, that we all create genius. We're all acting in the category of genius, even if nobody is pointing at us and saying, ah yes, you're a genius, you're a genius, you're a genius at whatever you do. We're still there, we're still part of it, we still create it, we still help to form that category. We make the category, not the person who's being called a genius. They do not create the category. We put it on them, we put them in it. And one of the reasons that I suspect that this is true, that I think I know this, is that I can remember a Wile E. Coyote cartoon where he pulls out his business card and it describes him as a super genius. And the audience who watches that cartoon is expected to laugh. You're not supposed to refer to yourself as a genius. You don't have it on your business card. It's not your job. You know, you don't go to, oh, I'm employed as a genius and I have my genius degree and I'm going to go and get paid for the job of genius. And the cartoon is a piece of popular entertainment. The people who made it knew that this would get a laugh, that the audience, the popular audience that watched this cartoon would understand, no, you don't call yourself a genius, Wile E. Coyote. For one thing, you're a bit stupid. And for another thing, that's something that we put on you. We give you that category. And that category that we give you performs a function for us. Sorry, I have a slight cough. Going to have a quick drink of water, if you don't mind. Make a rattling noise in the microphone here. And I'm going to recap it so it doesn't spill all over this TV screen. All right, so we invent the category of genius, and we usually only apply it to one or two aspects of a person when we refer to them as a genius. If I'm trying to think of an example of this, I might refer back to the mathematician, Maryam Mirzakhani, who died in July. And if I'm referring to her as a genius, if I walk around saying, oh yes, she was a genius, and you walk up to me and you say, well, no, she wasn't, because she couldn't paint. I'm going to say, look, I don't think you quite understand the terms that we're speaking under. Whether she could paint or not has no relevance at all to the fact whether she, a higher mathematician, can be referred to as a genius or not. Now, if you think of the way that we think of ourselves, to ourselves, we are not just one thing. We're a whole network of things. You know, we're a series of emotions and memories and actions that we've performed and things that we've achieved, things that we've done, things we might be proud of, things that we've read, all this, you know, blah, 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 blah. We're not just the one thing. I mean, to herself, she would not have been just a higher mathematician. But while we're putting her in the category of genius for, I think, our own convenience, that's what we think of her as. And just that one little thing, which again suggests to me that this is our group project. This is not her. And continuing to think about her, I was asking myself, how do I know that this person is a genius? What would make me put her in that category of genius? I know nothing about higher mathematics. Nothing, you know. I have watched her on YouTube delivering entire lectures. She was a professor at Stanford until she died. So you can see her on there talking about, I think it's something to do with moduli spaces. See, I can't even remember accurately what it was. But I know it's something that I know nothing about. So why would I ever feel that I was fit to describe this woman as a genius? Where do I get my information from? Well, I've already established that all my info is second-hand. You know, I can't judge her conclusions myself. The largest body of information about her that I can think of right now was actually in her obituaries in July. So if I stood up here and I made an argument, yes, Mirzakhani is a genius, that's where I would be getting most of my information from. I would be remembering that in a number of the headlines, they actually described her as a genius. So people actually put that word in a sentence with her name. I remember that the BBC spot that you can still watch on YouTube, I think it is, you know, mathematical or mathematician genius Maryam Mirzakhani has died. And even when the obituaries weren't outright describing her as a genius, they were still quoting people who were saying things that suggested to me that she was at least potentially in that category. For example, they mentioned something that her thesis advisor said. She had a PhD from Harvard, and just as an aside, just saying those words, a PhD from Harvard, or hearing them makes me think, you know, I've heard so much about Harvard, it's such a famous university. Boy, someone who gets in there must be pretty clever, and someone who gets a PhD from Harvard must be extra clever. So just hearing those words already makes me think, okay, I really want to put her in the category, if not of genius, at least as the category of someone who's pretty damn good. So her thesis advisor said, referring to her thesis paper, that this is the sort of paper that most mathematicians wish they could come up with once in the course of their career. And this is something that she wrote as her thesis. This was not even when she had gone on and, you know, got her job as a professor. Even when she was a student, she was writing like this and thinking like this. So I'm thinking, I see that. Wow, she's really exceptional. She's potentially a genius. And then I read the rest of the obituaries, and there are more people saying more things like this. And by the time I get to the end of all of these obituaries, I really want to put her in that category. But at the same time, if I'm honest with myself, I have to say this is really not something that I can judge personally. But I still want to do it. And I still want to argue for it. And I think most people could. I don't think that most people who use the word genius feel that they have to have an intimate involvement with whatever the person did that they're naming. For example, I bet there's lots of people out there who say, Picasso was a genius. And they don't particularly know anything about painting. They don't have to. They can still say with confidence he was a genius. There's a group project, I feel, to describe Picasso as a kind of genius. Going back to Mirzakhani for a second, another reason that I would start to think of her, or maybe the first time that I did sort of start to have it in my head that she might be a genius, was an event that was actually held here last semester. There's a UNLV student group called the Scientistas, and they invited a graphic designer to speak here. And the graphic designer had made a series of posters about women in the sciences. And Mirzakhani's face was on one of these posters. It was dedicated to her. And on one of the other posters, you had Marie Curie, who I have already been culturally taught to think of as a genius, even though, again, I don't actually know anything about the area that she worked in. I know a couple of things that I've heard. I've read biographies of her life, but I don't know. But just the fact that you had these two people in one place being put next to each other as peers, the fact that I already knew that, you know, Curie was considered a genius was enough for me to think, okay, this other person is possibly a genius as well. So what uses does this category have? This category of genius. What purpose does it serve to me to put her in this category? Well, it enables me to put this talk together, for one thing, and for the moment, for me, that's a pretty big deal. I see the word genius used like that by other people as well. For example, when I was thinking about it, I plugged the word genius into a search engine, and I came up with a number of articles by journalists who were writing things like 8 habits of genius, and pitching it to the reading audience as, okay, these are the things that you could do, and perhaps if you do them, you too will be a genius. So this was the pitch that they had to get people to read their article. This was how they were staying employed, which to them, I'm guessing, was a fairly important thing. And they would bring similar or the same names into these articles over and over again. Again, you would see the word Picasso, you would see Da Vinci, you would see Isaac Newton, you would see names like this, who culturally for a fairly long time have been plugged at us as geniuses, 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 geniuses. And I noticed that none of these journalists felt that they needed to defend the idea that these people were geniuses. Just the fact that they'd been pitched at us often enough, they could kind of accept or guess that their audience would believe that these people were geniuses. None of them spent, for example, a paragraph arguing, well, this is why I think Picasso is a genius and you should think so too. Even though, you know, he knew nothing about higher mathematics, boy, he could paint. None of them did that. It was enough for them just to give you a line or two, you know, Picasso, the Cubist painter, and then they would perhaps give you an anecdote. He woke up early at 6 a.m. This is a habit of genius. We should all do this, that kind of thing. I can't remember if that was one of Picasso's habits, by the way, but that was the sort of thing that they were proposing. They were fairly general, you know, good habits to have. And in this way, the idea of genius gets propagated. Those journalists, by doing what they do, by selling what they sell, were participating in the cultural idea of genius. And the names that they had were helping them to put forward this idea of genius, to continue it. I mean, what about other uses that the word genius might have. What does it mean if we call Picasso a genius? I mean, that's no use to Picasso, obviously. You know, nothing's of much use to Picasso anymore. But I think it does enable us to start a discussion about the area that this person is in. If we're a painter, for example, and someone comes up to us and says, oh, Picasso, the genius Picasso, the Cubist genius Picasso, we can then start a debate, a talk about painting with that in mind. Oh no, I don't think he was a genius. Well, I think he was a genius. Well, as a painter, I don't think he was really that good. Well, as a painter, I think he was historically significant. And then you can talk about how he was historically significant. Who has he influenced? What did he do? What did he help to introduce? Does the other person then come in and say, no, he shouldn't be in that category because there were actually all these other people around him who were moving that idea of Cubism forward, and they did more than he did, and boy, he's just the one whose name got in the history books. That kind of thing. Can you talk about that? Yes, absolutely, you can. And so genius, the idea of putting someone in that category becomes extremely helpful. It gives us a static thing that we can move around, that we can argue, that we can debate. It helps us, I think, to firm up our own ideas about what being extremely good at something might mean. Is genius more than being extremely good at something? What about all of the luck that goes into being a genius? What about the fact that Picasso was born in the right place at the right time with a father who, you know, encouraged him to paint, that he went to, Paris at the right time, that he had the right friends, that there was a movement starting there that could actually accommodate something that he was good at, that he had Cézanne already painting, that he happened to have that particular exhibition in Paris of objects, you know, African masks, and all this kind of thing that he then started incorporating into what he did. I mean, imagine him being born 2 centuries earlier when he wouldn't have had that to bounce off. Would he still be a genius? Imagine him staying at home. Would he still be a genius? If he'd had a different father, would he still be a genius? You know, do we start talking about luck? Do we start then talking about other aspects of geniusness? You know, does it help to be a certain nationality? Does it help to be a certain gender? Does it help to be in a certain area? One thing I noticed while I was looking at these articles was that nobody ever proposed the name of a serial killer as a genius. You know, there are certain areas of activity that don't really get included in the popular concept of genius. Musicians, yes. Mass murderers, generally not. I didn't expect to open any of these articles and see, well, Jeffrey Dahmer used to get up at 5 a.m. We should all do that and we'll be as successful as he was, you know, until they caught him. It doesn't happen. And this, I think, is important to think about when we consider ourselves as part of the project of genius. We are helping to propel this idea of genius as if it's something we should aspire to. What are the other qualities that should be in that category? You know, goodness, kindness. Should we disregard those? I mean, Picasso wasn't necessarily good or kind. Do we disregard those? We can have another debate about that. We can debate about ethics by calling on the idea of genius. We can think about the ways that categories have served other areas of human behavior. We can think about, for example, medicine. The fact that over the last couple of decades, some new categories to put people in have come into the idea of medicine and behavior, ADHD and things like that, where you can say, okay, what is this category? Should it exist? If it should exist, who should be in it? Is it harmful? Is it helpful? What can we do to treat it? Should it be treated? What does it do? Blah, 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 blah. So we extend this discussion of a specific category into potentially all the other areas of activity that we're interested in or that we think should be valued. And again, this is really more or less how I'd like to end, how I'd like to propose the idea of genius to you all, not as something, not as a label, not as a small singular category of activity that only a few people can participate in, but something where you also have people like Charlotte de Cray, a category that you don't necessarily have to be heard of to participate in, just by doing what you do as well as you can do it, just by going out there and talking about the things that you're interested in, by asking yourself, all right, if I'm calling this person a genius, why am I calling them a genius? And then starting to think back, okay, what actually influences me when I put people in categories? Am I working on second-hand information? Am I working on obituaries? Am I working on, you know, a 2-minute spot that I heard on BBC News and then saw on YouTube? Am I being influenced by nationality? I'm just going quickly into a side issue that I've just thought of. I did notice that when I was looking up these pop culture articles about, you know, 8 popular habits of genius, the writers who were American would tend to mention American people who are you know, thought by Americans to belong in the genius category, like Mark Twain. If I saw a similar article written by, say, a British journalist, Mark Twain was not in there. It was just not culturally someone who would be brought up by the word genius. I was more likely to see a British person's name. And I suspect that if you went into articles written in different languages by different cultures in different countries, you would see different names pop up that you wouldn't necessarily see in similar articles written here. So how does nationality influence us? All that kind of thing. And again, I think that supports the idea of this being a group project, that as a group, as an American group in this place and this time, you tend to frame genius in a certain way. And you also have the power, we all have the power to start changing that category if we want to start including more people if we want to disinclude people who we might think, no, we don't really think they belong there anymore. Once upon a time, Byron might have automatically been in that category. If, you know, you were, say, British and it was the 1800s, you might think, yeah, Byron, fantastic. But I don't think he would. I think most people today, I hope most people would agree with me that I don't think he's actually a genius. I'm not British, by the way, so I have no national horse in that race. I'm Australian. But yes, I've already said let me end on that note, so let me actually end on that note and let you get back to the coffee and the chicken and the art. And again, if you do want to talk to me about any of it, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much.